Imagine leaving behind your home, your wealth, and everything you own, only to arrive in a new land with nothing but faith in your heart. What happens when strangers open their doors, share their wealth, and even offer their families, all for the sake of God? This is not just history. It's one of the most powerful stories of brotherhood the world has ever seen. Stay with me till the end, because what you're about to hear will change the way you look at sacrifice, love, and unity forever. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. Welcome to this video where we will explore the beginning of the Medinan era of the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. In this journey, we will look at how the Prophet lived in Medina, the challenges he faced, and the wisdom behind his policies. After carefully reviewing the events that have been mentioned earlier, when we look at the detailed year-by-year account of the Medinan life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, it becomes clear how he spent this blessed period. But it must be kept in mind that throughout his time in Medina, whatever the Prophet did, whether in the form of defense, initiative, or corrective action, the ultimate goal was always the same: to stop people from resisting the universal mission and the universal call of Islam. The policy of the Prophet was never to destroy or exterminate the Quraysh or other enemies of Islam. That would have been against the nature of the one who was a mercy to all worlds. What remained before his eyes was always their guidance, not their destruction. In his entire Medinan life, the Prophet never made a decision, nor planned, nor took a practical step that was based on wiping out any group completely or forcing them into Islam. Regarding the Quraysh and other tribes, the Prophet's strategy was to preserve them while creating an environment in which they would either stop opposing Islam, reconcile peacefully, or eventually accept Islam. All the expeditions and military campaigns mentioned in the books of Seerah were based on this principle. Whenever the Prophet received intelligence from informants or scouts that a tribe or group was planning hostility against Islam, or that a caravan of the Quraysh would be passing through a certain route on a certain day, or that a tribe had already decided to attack or raid, or that an army was marching toward Medina to annihilate the Muslims, then, according to the situation, defensive measures, corrective steps, or counter-strategies were taken by sending military detachments. Sometimes expeditions were also sent out simply to investigate the movements of hostile forces. But whenever the Quraysh and the tribes of Arabia launched actual attacks intending to destroy the Muslims and Islam, then, compelled by necessity, the believers stood up with courage, placing their trust in God, and fought bravely in self-defense. The Medinan era can be divided into three distinct phases. The first phase was the foundation of the Islamic society and the stage of overcoming challenges. During this time, internal obstacles were created, and external enemies tried to erase Medina from existence and uproot the Islamic call completely. This phase ended with the Treaty of Hudaybiyah in the 6th year after Hijrah, when Muslims achieved dominance and control over the situation. The second phase was the period of peace with the Quraysh. During this time, the Prophet sent invitations to the rulers of the world, calling them to Islam, and eliminated the surrounding conspiracies. This phase concluded with the conquest of Mecca in the 8th year after Hijrah. The third phase was when multitudes of people entered the religion of God in large numbers. It was also the period when delegations from various nations and tribes came to Medina. This phase continued until the end of the Prophet's blessed life, in Rabi al-Awwal of the 11th year after Hijrah. At the time of the migration, the conditions in Medina were very significant. Migration did not simply mean escaping from persecution and ridicule, but it also carried the purpose of contributing to the creation of a new society within a peaceful land. This is why it was made obligatory upon every capable Muslim to take part in building this new homeland, dedicating effort for its stability, protection, and elevation. It is absolutely certain that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was the leader, guide, and commander of this society, and without any dispute, all matters were under his authority. In Medina, the Prophet faced three types of communities, each of which was completely different from the others, with its own unique set of challenges. These were his noble companions, the polytheists from the original tribes of Medina who had not yet accepted Islam, and the Jews. With regard to the companions, the challenges were distinct from what they had faced in Mecca. In Mecca, although their creed and purpose were one, they were scattered across different families, weak and oppressed, with no authority in their hands. All power belonged to the enemies of religion, and the Muslims did not possess any of the essential elements that a human society requires for its formation. For this reason, the Meccan revelations focused on laying down the principles of Islam, with commandments that each person could practice individually. They emphasized righteousness, good morals, and noble character while warning against immoral and disgraceful behavior. In contrast, in Medina, from the very first day, authority was in the hands of the Muslims themselves, and no external power ruled over them. Now the time had come for Muslims to deal with issues of civilization and social organization, economics and financial systems, politics and governance, as well as matters of peace and war. It was now necessary to provide clear guidance on lawful and unlawful matters, worship, ethics, and all aspects of life. The time had arrived for the Muslims to establish a new society, an Islamic society, completely distinct from the pre-Islamic society and different from any other existing human community. This society was to represent the Islamic mission for which Muslims had endured hardships and struggles for 13 years. Naturally, the establishment of such a society could not be accomplished in a single day, month, or even year. It required a long process during which laws would be revealed gradually, accompanied by training, practice, and implementation. Alongside this gradual formation, there were also other urgent issues that demanded immediate attention. Within the Muslim community in Medina, there were two types of groups. One consisted of those who already had their land, homes, and wealth, and their concern was no greater than that of any person living securely among his own family. This was the group of the Ansar, among whom there had been deep-rooted hostilities and enmities carried on for generations. Alongside them was the other group, the Muhajirun, who were deprived of all such facilities. They had left everything behind, arriving in Medina with nothing, stripped of property and means, relying only on God's will. They had neither homes to live in, nor work to earn from, nor wealth to support their livelihood. Furthermore, their numbers were not small, and they continued to increase daily, since the call had already been announced that whoever believed in God and his messenger should migrate to Medina. It must also be remembered that Medina was not a wealthy city, nor did it have large sources of income. This imbalance upset the economic stability of Medina. To make matters worse, the enemies of Islam imposed an economic boycott, cutting off imports and making the situation extremely severe. At the time of migration, the second community, meaning the original polytheist inhabitants of Medina, had no dominance over the Muslims. Some of these polytheists were in doubt and hesitation about leaving their ancestral religion, but they did not harbor hatred or hostility against Islam and the Muslims. These people, after a short while, became Muslims and turned into sincere and steadfast believers. In contrast, there were others among the polytheists who concealed deep hatred and enmity against the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the Muslims. However, they did not dare to openly confront him. Instead, due to circumstances, they were forced to show love and loyalty toward him. At the forefront of this group was Abdullah bin Ubay bin Sulul. This was the man whom the tribes of Aws and Khazraj had agreed to appoint as their leader after the Battle of Bu'aydh. Before that, the two factions had never agreed upon any leader. A crown was even being prepared so that it could be placed on his head and his kingship formally declared. In other words, he was on the verge of becoming the king of Medina when suddenly the arrival of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, changed everything. The attention of the people shifted from him to the Prophet. For this reason, he felt that it was the Prophet who had deprived him of his kingship, and he concealed bitter hostility in his heart against him. Even so, when after the Battle of Badr he saw that the circumstances were not in his favor, and that by remaining upon polytheism he would also be deprived of worldly benefits, he outwardly declared his acceptance of Islam. But inwardly he remained a disbeliever. Whenever he found an opportunity to harm the Prophet and the Muslims, he never missed it. With him were those chiefs who had once hoped to obtain high positions under his kingship, but now had lost that chance. These men became his partners and supported him in his schemes. Often, they would cunningly use young and simple Muslims as their tools to carry out their plots. The third community was the Jews. As mentioned earlier, they had sought refuge in the Hijaz after fleeing the oppression of the Assyrians and Romans. They were originally Hebrews, but after settling in the Hijaz, They adopted the Arab way of life, their appearance, language, and culture took on an Arabic form, and even their tribal and individual names became Arabic. Marriages also took place between them and the Arabs. However, despite all of this, they maintained their racial pride and did not fully integrate with the Arabs. Instead, they gloried in their Israelite identity and despised the Arabs, calling them ummi, which to them meant ignorant, uncivilized, lowly, backward, and untouchable. Their belief was that the wealth of the Arabs was permissible for them to consume. God mentioned this in the Quran. They said, "There is no blame upon us regarding the ummiyin." 3 hours 75 minutes, meaning, in their view, there was no accountability for consuming the property of the Arabs. Among them, there was no active effort to spread their religion. The main practices they held onto were fortune-telling, sorcery, and incantations. Through these, they considered themselves men of knowledge, virtue, and spiritual leadership. The Jews had great skill in earning wealth. The trade of grain, dates, wine, and clothing was in their hands. They imported grain, clothing, and wine, and exported dates. In addition, they engaged in other occupations as well. In trade, they charged the Arabs double and triple profits, and they did not stop there. They were also usurers. They lent large sums of money on interest to Arab chiefs and leaders, who, for the sake of fame, squandered this money wastefully on poets and praise singers. In return for these loans, the Jews would take the lands, fields, and orchards of these chiefs as collateral, and within a few years, they became the actual owners of these properties. They were also experts in intrigue, conspiracy, and stirring up wars. With great subtlety, they would sow seeds of hostility between neighboring tribes, inciting one against the other without their realizing it. As a result, continuous wars broke out among the tribes. And if ever the flames of war seemed to die down, the hidden hand of the Jews would reignite it. Their skill was such that they themselves remained safe and detached while enjoying the spectacle of the Arabs destroying each other. At the same time, they ensured that they continued giving out heavy loans on interest so that lack of resources would never end the fighting. In this way, they earned double profits. On one hand, preserving their own community, and on the other hand, increasing their wealth through compounded interest, accumulating vast fortunes. In Yathrib, Medina, there were 3 well-known Jewish tribes. Banu Qaynuqa were allies of the Khazraj, and their settlement was inside Medina. Banu Nadir and Banu Qurayza were allies of the AWS, and their settlements were around Medina. For a long time these tribes had been igniting the flames of war between AWS and Khazraj, and in the Battle of Buwadih they themselves had participated along with their allies. It was only natural that nothing could be expected from these Jews except enmity and hatred toward Islam, because the Prophet was not from their lineage. Their tribal pride, which had become deeply rooted in their psychology and mentality, could not find satisfaction in him. Moreover, Islam was a righteous call that united broken hearts, extinguished the fire of hatred, demanded honesty in all dealings, and required consumption only of pure and lawful wealth. This meant that the tribes of Yathrib, Medina would now unite, and in such a situation they would inevitably be freed from Jewish control. As a result, the Jews' trading activities would weaken, and they would lose the usurious wealth upon which their affluence depended. There was even the risk that these tribes might awaken and reclaim the usurious wealth which the Jews had taken from them without return, and perhaps even repossess the lands and orchards seized by Jews through usury. Since the Jews had realized that Islam sought to establish itself in Yathrib, Medina, they had already calculated these risks. For this reason, from the very moment of the Prophet's arrival in Medina, the Jews bore deep hostility toward Islam and Muslims, though they were only able to openly display it after some time. This condition is clearly evident from an incident reported by Ibn Ishaq. He narrated from al-Mu'minin Safiya bint Huyay bin Akhtab, who said, "I was the most beloved child of my father in his eyes, and whenever I met him or my uncle Abu Yasir with any of their children, they would prefer me above the rest. When the Messenger of God arrived and stayed in Quba with the Banu Ammar bin Awf, my father Huyay bin Akhtab and my uncle Abu Yasir went to him early in the morning and returned at sunset, exhausted, weary, stumbling. I ran cheerfully to them as usual, but they were so full of grief that, by God, neither of them even noticed me. I overheard my uncle say to my father, "Is it him?" My father replied, "Yes, by God." My uncle asked, "Do you recognize him clearly?" My father said, "Yes." My uncle said, "So what is in your heart toward him?" My father replied, "Enmity, by God, for as long as I live." This is also confirmed by a narration in Sahih al-Bukhari regarding the conversion of Abdullah bin Salam. He was a highly respected Jewish scholar. When he heard of the Prophet's arrival at Banu al-Najjar, he hurried to meet him and asked questions that only a prophet could answer. Upon hearing the Prophet's replies, he immediately embraced Islam. Then he told the Prophet that the Jews were a slanderous people. If they knew of his conversion before the Prophet questioned them, they would surely defame him. So the Prophet summoned the Jews and asked them, "What do you say about Abdullah bin Salam?" They replied, "He is our greatest scholar, the son of our greatest scholar, the best among us, and the son of the best among us." In some narrations they said, "He is our leader, the son of our leader," and in others, "He is the most virtuous among us, and the son of the most virtuous among us." The Prophet then asked, "What if Abdullah accepts Islam?" They replied several times, "God forbid, may God protect him from that." At that moment Abdullah bin Salam came out and declared, "I bear witness that there is no God but God, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God." As soon as they heard this, the Jews said, "He is the worst of us, the son of the worst of us," and began slandering him. In another narration Abdullah bin Salam said to them, "O assembly of Jews, fear God. By the one besides whom there is no deity, you know that he is truly the messenger of God, and that he has come with the truth." But they replied, "You lie." The attitude of the Quraysh of Mecca. Outside Medina, the fiercest enemies of the Muslims were the Quraysh. For 13 years, while the Muslims lived under their control, they used every method of terror, threats, and persecution. They inflicted various hardships and tortures, spread organized propaganda, and applied severe psychological tactics. When the Muslims migrated to Medina, the Quraysh confiscated their lands, houses, and wealth, separated them from their families, and imprisoned and tortured those they could seize. Still not satisfied, they conspired to kill the Prophet Muhammad and eradicate his mission completely, devoting all their resources to this end. Even after the Muslims escaped to Medina, some 500 kilometers away, the Quraysh exploited their status as custodians of the sacred mosque and neighbors of the Kaaba. Because of this, they held both religious leadership and worldly authority among the Arabs. They incited the other tribes of Arabia to boycott Medina, reducing its imports drastically, while the number of Muslim refugees there increased daily. In reality, war already existed between Mecca and the Muslims in their new homeland, and it is absurd to blame the Muslims for this conflict. Just as their wealth had been seized, they had the right to seize the wealth of the oppressors. Just as they had been persecuted, they had the right to retaliate. Just as obstacles had been placed in their lives, they had the right to place obstacles in the lives of their enemies. In this way, they could prevent the oppressors from destroying them. These were the challenges and crises that the messenger of God faced upon his arrival in Medina as prophet, guide, leader, and commander. He dealt with all these issues with prophetic character and leadership. He treated every group with the approach it deserved, sometimes gentle and merciful, sometimes firm and severe. Yet, without doubt, mercy and compassion always outweighed severity. Within a few years, leadership fell into the hands of Islam and the Muslims. The construction of the Prophet's mosque. When the Prophet arrived in Medina on Friday, 12 Rabi al-Awwal, 1 AH, September 28, 622 CE, he stayed at the house of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. At that time, he declared that his final residence would be established there, God willing. Soon afterward, his first step was to build the Prophet's mosque at the place where his camel had sat down. The land belonged to 2 orphan boys, and the Prophet purchased it for a price. He himself participated in the construction, carrying bricks and stones. On the land there were some pagan graves, some ruins, and a few palm and thorny trees. The Prophet ordered the graves removed, the ruins leveled, and the trees cut down. At that time the Qibla was toward Jerusalem. The side posts of the door were made of stone, and the walls were built with mud bricks. The roof was made of palm branches and leaves, supported by palm trunks. The ground was covered with sand and small pebbles. 3 doors were installed. From the Qibla wall to the back wall, the length was about 100 cubits, and the width was about the same or slightly less. The foundation was about 3 cubits deep. The Prophet also had several rooms built alongside the mosque for his wives, constructed of mud bricks with roofs of palm trunks and branches. Once these chambers were completed, the Prophet moved from Abu Ayyub's house into them. The mosque was not only a place of prayer but also a university where Muslims learned the teachings and guidance of Islam. It was a gathering place where members of tribes, who had long been divided by ignorance, conflict, and hatred, met with love and brotherhood. It was also the center from which the administration of the small state was conducted and various expeditions were dispatched. Furthermore, it served as a parliament where the councils of consultation and administration held their meetings. In addition, the mosque was home to a considerable number of poor emigrants who had no houses, wealth, or families in Medina. In the early days of the migration, the call to prayer, adhan, was also established. This heavenly melody echoed 5 times a day across the horizon, shaking the very world. It proclaimed daily that there is no deity except God and that Muhammad is the messenger of God. It negated every claim to greatness except God's greatness and denied every religion except the one brought by the Prophet Muhammad. The honor of seeing it in a dream was given to the companion Abdullah bin Zayd bin Abidi Rabah, and the Prophet approved it. Umar bin al-Khattab also saw the same dream. The details can be found in Jami, al-Tirmidhi, Sunan Abu Dawud, Musnad Ahmad, and Sahih ibn Khuzaimah. Brotherhood among Muslims. Just as the Messenger of God arranged for the construction of the Prophet's mosque, establishing it as a center of gathering and love, he also accomplished another shining achievement in human history. This was the institution of brotherhood between the emigrants and the helpers. Imam bin Qayyim wrote that the Messenger of God established this brotherhood in the house of Anas bin Malik between the emigrants and the helpers. There were 90 men, half emigrants and half helpers. The foundation of this brotherhood was that they would support one another in hardship and, in case of death, inherit from one another instead of their blood relatives. This ruling of inheritance remained until the Battle of Badr, after which the verse was revealed that blood relatives are closer to one another in inheritance. Thus, the rule of mutual inheritance was abrogated, though the bond of brotherhood remained. It is also said that another brotherhood was established among the emigrants themselves, but the first account is authentic. In reality, the emigrants did not need such a bond among themselves, since they already shared the ties of Islam, homeland, and family. The case of the emigrants and helpers, however, was different. The purpose of this brotherhood was to dissolve the prejudices of ignorance, to erase distinctions of lineage, color, and homeland, and to ensure that loyalty and disavowal were based on nothing but Islam. This brotherhood was filled with the spirit of selflessness, compassion, friendship, and goodness, which illuminated the new society with remarkable achievements. It is narrated in Sahih al-Bukhari that when the emigrants arrived in Medina, the Messenger of God established brotherhood between Abdur-Rahman bin Awf and Sa'd bin Rabi. Sa'd said to Abdur-Rahman, "I am the wealthiest among the helpers. I will divide my wealth into 2 parts and you may take half. I also have 2 wives. Look at them and tell me which one pleases you more, and I will divorce her so that after her waiting period you may marry her." Abdur-Rahman replied, "May God bless your family and wealth. Just show me where your marketplace is." They showed him the market of Banu Qaynuqa, and he began trading there. Before long, he became wealthy on his own and then got married. Likewise, Abu Hurairah narrated that the helpers said to the Prophet, "Distribute our date orchards between us and our brothers." The Prophet said, "No." The helpers then said, "Then let our brothers take over the work while we share the fruits with them." The emigrants replied, "We hear and we obey." From this it is clear how generously the helpers honored their emigrant brothers, and with what love, sincerity, selflessness, and sacrifice they supported them. It also shows how much the emigrants valued this generosity. They never exploited it but only took what was necessary to restore their broken livelihoods. Indeed, this brotherhood was a rare wisdom a remarkable strategy, and the best solution to many of the problems Muslims faced.